guys, today we're going to talk about leadership. I'm going to leave it to you to go through the learning outcomes as always. So one of the key questions that gets asked a lot with regard to leadership is what's the difference between leaders and managers? And your book talks about several distinct characteristics between leaders versus managers. Managers are basically, it's a position, it's a job that you're in. So you can have managers who have the title of production manager or advertising manager. That doesn't mean that they're very effective as a leader. A leader is really somebody who sets the goals, the values, the mission, and gets people to climb on board with their goals, values, and mission. Managers don't necessarily do that. Managers really are a much shorter term view and sort of looking at ways to make sure that people are doing their jobs. And so the video that accompanies this chapter actually talks about a variety of different things that distinguish leaders from managers. So the next question after we get to is someone a manager versus a leader is what makes a leader a leader? Are they born a leader, or are leaders born or made? And this slide really focuses on sort of leaders are born that way. Sort of trait theory means that there are certain traits, and traits are by definition long-standing characteristics. So people have them over the course of their lifetime. So to some extent, leaders have greater desire to lead, higher drive. They are on average more honest and have higher integrity than the population at large, but not hugely so. They generally have higher self-confidence, somewhat higher in cognitive ability, but I do want to clarify that that's not perfectly linear, because once you reach a certain point, you could sort of be too smart for your own good. That if you think about somebody who's so smart that they have a hard time really relating to the public at large, or to their subordinates at large, in that regard, cognitive ability is only an asset up to a point. And of course, understanding the business is key to being a good leader. And so if you think about, for example, Steve Jobs, he was visionary in how he viewed what Apple could be, but he also had a really deep understanding of the business that enabled him to be effective as a leader. Having said that, let me go back for a second. Having said that, to some extent, leaders are born leaders, that doesn't mean that you can't train somebody to be a better leader. So while having these characteristics on average is associated with being a better leader, people who are lacking in some of these characteristics can be trained in some of them. So you can train people to be more self-confident, or to exude more self-confidence. You can train people to, they may not have a natural desire to lead, but you can put them in a situation and say, hey, they need you. So if you think about MLK, he didn't go out, set out to say, hey, I want to be the leader of the civil rights movement. It was largely, he was in the right place at the right time, and once he was in that situation, he was like, well, I guess I have a desire to lead now because that's the situation that I've been put in. So there's a little bit of both in terms of the leaders being born versus leaders being made. So the two primary characteristics that make up leadership behavior are what we call initiating structure and consideration. Initiating structure is really, depending on different research models of leadership, is sometimes called task orientation. So you need a leader needs to be able to say, this is what needs to get done. So like the focus on the specific tasks and, sort of compelling people or impelling them to get it done. And the consideration or individualized consideration has to do with the fact that you need to have a rapport with your subordinates if you're going to actually expect them to do that. So if, you're just kind of like the taskmaster that says, hey, you need to get this done, nobody's going to want to be led by you. But if you have individualized consideration for each of your employees, each of your subordinates, and sort of explain to them why they need to do it, how they need to do it, and treat them like individuals, you'll be a lot more successful as a leader. I'm not going to get too much into Blake and Mouton stuff because there's really not been a whole lot of support for it in the literature on leadership. I do want to talk about contingency theories, and the book talks about Fiedler's for whatever reason. It's not the most popular one right now, but I want to talk about contingency theories in general terms. Basically, contingencies are, if people say, well, what's the best leadership type of, leadership style? And the answer is it depends. When we say it depends as an answer to anything with regard to management, that means it's a contingency theory. It means it depends contingent on or depending on something. In Fiedler's contingency model, it has to do with matching leaders with the correct situation. And in the next slide, we'll talk about, the next two slides, I think we'll talk about what makes for an ideal situation or under what circumstances we need to match. So situational favorableness has to do with leader-member relationships. So, when you think about a leader and his or her subordinates, we can't say that the leader is a universally good leader or a universally bad leader. For some people, they may have exactly what it takes for that to get that subordinate to get the job done. For other people, they may roll their eyes and say, I wouldn't put forth more effort for you than I would put forth for, this bottle of water. So the nature of the relationship between the supervisor and the subordinate is a key situational factor, and we call it, your book says leader-member relations. It's usually called leader-member exchange, or LMX, and that's actually one of my key areas of study. The task structure, so some tasks inherently are very structured. If you think about an assembly line, there's little variance in the task. The assembly line moves and the employee does what he or she is supposed to do. It's a very structured task. And the third characteristic of situational favorableness has to do with position power. And that refers to the extent to which the supervisor has legitimate power in his or her position. So, for example, maybe they have the title manager, but they don't have the authority to actually hire or fire people. In that case, you would say their position power is very weak. So usually when we think about position power, it's how much power they have to control rewards and punishment over their employees. And this kind of puts those three together into one chart to sort of get at what's considered a favorable, unfavorable, or moderately favorable climate. I'm not really going to get into the least preferred coworker research. Again, that's really not very popular these days in the research. So when we talk about leaders and situations, going back to Fiedler's model, it assumes that leaders can't really change their innate style. So it's either I'm, a leader who is focused primarily on task, or I'm a leader who's focused primarily on my employees. And the only, you can't change that about me, but what you can do is match me to a situation where either I'm more focused, my job is more focused on task, or my job is more focused on maintaining relationships with my employees. Path goal theory says that leaders can improve subordinate satisfaction by clarifying and creating paths and explaining to their employees the goals, the paths available for achieving their goals. And so they talk about subordinate contingencies, leadership styles, environmental contingencies, and outcomes. And the next couple of slides are going to go through those in a little more detail. So we talk about leadership styles, directive, that you'll do this, supportive, sort of like, I'm just here to help you get your job done, participative, hey guys, this is what I'm thinking about doing, what do you think, and achievement oriented, we need to get this done by a certain deadline. And no one leader is completely directive or completely participative or completely supportive. There's a balance of all four of those, and again, it's a matter of figuring out what works best in certain situations or with certain types of employees. The subordinate contingencies include perceived abilities. So do the subordinates feel confident that they can get the job done? Do they have the appropriate experience? And when we talk about locus of control, if that's not a term that's familiar, people are either what we call internally focused or externally focused with regard to locus of control. And what that means is internals sort of blame both their success and their failure on things within their control. So if I succeed, it's because I worked hard, it's because I've been trying, it's because I've been studying, it's because I did all the assignments. And that's what internal control is about, internal locus of control. External locus of control means that you assume that things get done because of things outside of your control, be it luck, fate, divine intervention, what have you. But if you whether you're successful or not, it gets attributed to things outside of your personal control. In terms of the environmental contingencies, how much structure does the task have? I talked about that a couple of slides ago. What's the formal authority system? Is there an open door policy where you can just go into your supervisor's office and say, hey, I know you asked me to do X, but I think Y would be better, or is that sort of seen as, defying the organizational norm? And finally, the primary work group. Work groups differ in terms of their own cultural norms, so depending on what work group you're in, the same type of leadership may be more or less successful. And this gives you, sort of a chart for what's most appropriate with each type of leadership style. Normative decision theory helps leaders figure out how much employee participation they should allow or seek when making decisions. And this is a little bit different from other theories in that it focuses specifically on decisions rather than leadership styles in general. And sort of going, from the left side to the right side, all the way on the left, the leader makes all the decisions, tells the employees what they need to do, how to do it, and basically it's all on the leader's shoulders. And as you move further and further over to the right, more and more discretion is being given to the employees, and there's greater participation in terms of helping reach a decision, figuring out how to implement that decision, evaluating alternatives that come up in the decision-making process, etc. Okay, I'm running short on time here. I'm not going to get too much into that. Sort of general notions within leadership research is that visionary leadership has to do with just really looking very far into the future. I'm not talking about 6 months from now, a year from now. I'm talking 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Where do we want our organization to be, and how can I get my subordinates to climb on board with this vision? So it's really about goal setting and planning and getting other people on board with what the vision is. Charisma plays a key role in being a visionary leader, because you can have all the vision in the world, but if you don't have charisma, it's going to be hard to get your employees to jump on the train with you and follow your vision. And so when we talk about charisma, it's actually very hard to articulate, and it's hard to define. It's kind of one of those things, we know charisma when we see it, so some people are just naturally very adept at creating relationships, and that's largely charisma. Their sort of inherent likability. And while charisma is generally seen as a very favorable leadership trait, there's an upside and downside to it. So you need charisma to draw people to you. It's basically your sort of person magnet, if you will. But if your vision is negative, but you're charismatic, that's dangerous. So think about Hitler, for example. Did he have a vision? Yes. Was he charismatic? Unfortunately, yes, he was very charismatic. You have to be pretty darn charismatic to get people on board with, hey, what do you think about genocide, guys? So he was very charismatic, but I do want to underscore the dangers in charisma being possessed by people with an unethical vision. I'm going to stop here in the interest of time because there's only a few seconds left, and have you go through the remaining couple slides by yourself. Have a great week. Bye-bye.